Welcome to this deep dive. For those of you with a deep connection to the Catholic faith, we thought we'd explore a really fascinating figure today. Someone right at the crossroads of faith, science, and, well, mystery during the Renaissance.
That's right. We're talking about Philippus Aureolus Theophrastus Bombastus von Hohenheim.
Or maybe better known as Paracelsus?
Exactly. A huge figure, but also, quite complex. His work touched on medicine, alchemy, theology, philosophy, really embodies that whole period of intense intellectual change.
Alchemy. Yeah, that word alone probably catches the ear, especially if you're interested in church history and how it, interacted with different ideas.
Definitely.
So in this deep dive, we want to unpack what we actually know about Paracelsus, his life, his big ideas.
And importantly, why someone with a strong Catholic faith might find his story relevant today.
Right. And what was the church's view, historically speaking, on his, let's say, unconventional ideas and, what's his lasting impact?
That's the plan. And we're drawing on some solid historical analysis here, looking specifically at Paracelsus, his alchemy, and how the Catholic Church viewed it all.
Good. And it's worth remembering, isn't it, that alchemy back then wasn't just, trying to turn lead into gold in some basement.
Oh, absolutely not. It was deeply tied up with spiritual beliefs, religious ideas about the cosmos.
Yeah.
It's a really significant lens for him and for many others, too.
Okay, so let's start with the man himself. Who was this Philippus Bombastus von Hohenheim Paracelsus?
Well, he was born around 1493, probably late in the year, November, December, near Einsiedeln in Switzerland.
Okay.
And he died in Salzburg, Austria, September 24th, 1541. Now, that name, Paracelsus, he gave himself that name.
Oh, really?
Yeah. It basically means beyond Celsus or greater than Celsus. Celsus was a highly respected Roman physician. So it shows his ambition right from the start.
Wow, okay. That's quite a statement to make. What about his background? Where did this guy come from?
His father, Wilhelm von Hohenheim, was actually a physician and a chemist, and he had noble roots. His mother's side is a bit less certain, likely connected to the local Benedictine abbey in Einsiedeln, maybe as a bondswoman.
Interesting mix.
It is. And Paracelsus himself often played up his more humble connections. He even used the name Eremita, referencing the Einsiedeln hermitage.
Huh. So noble father, maybe humbler, more spiritual connection through his mother and the abbey. You can see how that might shape someone.
Absolutely. And his early education reflected this breadth. His father probably taught him a lot about nature, botany, medicine, minerals, even mining. Practical stuff.
Right.
But he also got a classical, humanistic education and theological teaching from local clergy and an abbey school.
To science and theology right from the start.
Exactly. There are some stories, maybe not fully proven, about him being tutored by bishops or even the occultist Johannes Trithemius. It's maybe more likely he was just influenced by their writings.
Still, that blend, science, faith, maybe even a touch of the esoteric, it sets the stage.
It really does. Then he went on to formal medical studies. Started at the University of Basel when he was only 16, later moved to Vienna.
Okay.
And he got his doctorate, his MD, from the University of Ferrara in Italy, around 1515 or 1516. And Ferrara was known for being, more focused on observation.
So that fits. He seems like an observation kind of guy, not just books.
Totally. Despite having the formal training, he became a huge critic of the standard medical teaching of the day, the Galenic system.
Based on the ancient Greek physician Galen.
Yes, and Avicenna, too. That dominated the universities. Paracelsus championed learning directly from nature, from actual experience, rather than just trusting these ancient texts.
He wasn't afraid to speak his mind, then.
Not at all. He apparently called Aristotle a sharp illusionist. He really distrusted purely theoretical knowledge, if it wasn't backed by, seeing it yourself.
And thinking about our listener again, that drive to find truth through direct experience, even if it means questioning authority. That's interesting. Did his travels play into this?
Oh, definitely. He traveled widely, learning from folk healers, barber surgeons, alchemists, people outside the formal system. That almost certainly fueled his rejection of the old dogma.
And didn't he do something pretty dramatic in Basel?
Who did? He publicly burned Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, a huge symbolic act, basically saying, out with the old, untested authority.
Wow. Okay, so beyond the dramatic gestures, what were his actual contributions, his big ideas in medicine and alchemy?
Well, he's essentially seen as the founder of toxicology.
Right, the dose makes the poison idea.
Exactly. And it's still fundamental today. He also pioneered using specific chemicals and minerals in medicine, things like mercury, iron, copper.
Which was different from the usual herbal stuff.
Very different. That was part of his system called iatrochemistry. It moved away from the old idea of balancing the four humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, toward using specific substances for specific illnesses.
That sounds much more targeted, more like modern medicine in a way.
In a way, yes. It was a big shift. He's also credited with naming the element zinc, zincum, around 1526.
Huh.
And he proposed a kind of biochemical idea about digestion. Plus, he made real strides in describing diseases. He recognized syphilis was contagious. He figured out that miner's lung disease silicosis came from breathing in metal vapors at work.
Identifying an occupational disease like that back then, that's impressive.
It really was. Linking environment and illness. And underpinning a lot of this was that hermetic idea we mentioned, the microcosm, macrocosm.
The human body mirroring the universe.
Yes. He deeply believed the body, the microcosm, corresponded to the universe, the macrocosm, understanding that connection was crucial for health, but also for spiritual well-being.
You can see how that idea, that sense of divine order and connection, might resonate within a Catholic worldview too, God's creation reflecting his design.
Precisely. Now, after his studies, as we said, he traveled a lot, roughly 1513 to 1524, just soaking up knowledge everywhere.
From all sorts of people, not just academics.
All right. Barber surgeons, folk healers, alchemists.
Yeah.
He valued that practical, hands-on experience immensely.
And this eventually led him back to Basel.
It did, around 1527. His reputation got him appointed city physician and a professor at the university there.
But given his personality, I'm guessing that wasn't smooth sailing.
No, not exactly. His teaching style was confrontational. He pushed hard for his reforms, constantly criticized the establishment.
And then came the book burning.
Exactly. That was kind of the last straw. He was forced to flee Basel in 1528.
So brilliant, innovative, but maybe not the easiest colleague.
That seems fair. The rest of his life was spent moving around, practicing medicine, writing constantly. He wrote a huge amount. He died in Salzburg in 1541.
What stands out is that willingness to challenge things, to look for truth, even if it meant leaving the beaten path.
Absolutely. A defining trait.
Okay, you've mentioned alchemy several times. Maybe we should unpack that a bit more. For someone maybe only familiar with the modern idea of chemistry, what exactly was alchemy in his time?
All right, good idea. Alchemy goes way back. Ancient Egypt, the Middle East, Greco-Roman Alexandria was a big center. It seems to have links to early crafts practiced in temples, metallurgy, dyeing, making imitation jewels, that kind of thing.
So practical roots.
Yes, but also philosophical and spiritual ones. It drew on Greek ideas, like the four elements earth, air, fire, water, and also on Egyptian and Babylonian mythology. The figure Hermes Trismegistus was often seen as its, well, mythical founder.
So it wasn't just about trying to make gold. That's the popular image.
That was definitely part of it, especially early on the transmutation of base metals to gold called chrysopoeia. But alchemy's goals became much broader.
Like what?
The search for the elixir of life, for immortality, universal medicines or panaceas. And significantly, it often had a spiritual dimension, the idea of inner transformation, purification, even redemption through the alchemical process.
Okay, much deeper than just chemistry. Who were some key figures involved in this over the centuries?
Oh, a long list. Early on, people like Zosimos and Panopolis, Mary the Jewess. Later, in the Islamic world, Jabir ibn Hayyan, known as Geber in Europe. Then prominent medieval figures like Albertus Magnus, Roger Bacon.
Wait, Albertus Magnus, as in St. Albertus Magnus?
The very same.
Yeah.
And even Isaac Newton was deeply involved in alchemy. And much later, Carl Jung explored its psychological symbolism. So a really diverse group.
Fascinating. And what were the core concepts they worked with?
Well, transmutation, obviously. The idea of the philosopher's stone was huge, this legendary substance that could supposedly cause transmutation, grant immortality, cure all ills.
The ultimate multi-tool?
Kind of.
Yeah.
Then there was the prima materia, the idea of a fundamental underlying substance from which everything is made.
Okay.
The four elements were an early framework, but Paracelsus himself added his tria, prima, sulfur, mercury, and salt as the three essential principles in matter.
His own spin on it.
Yes. And we've mentioned the microcosm, macrocosm analogy central to alchemy. Also, the doctrine of signatures. The idea that a plant's shape or color might hint at what it could cure, like walnuts looking like brains, suggesting they're good for the head.
Ah, right. I've heard of that.
And finally, this idea of spiritual alchemy, viewing the whole process as a metaphor for the soul's journey toward perfection or enlightenment.
So it really was this blend of like lab work and spiritual quest. Given all that, especially the spiritual and sometimes secretive side, how did the Catholic Church view alchemy historically?
It's complicated, not a simple yes or no. There was definitely suspicion early on.
Why?
Several reasons. Its roots were seen as pagan, connected to Hermetic texts. The secrecy often involved didn't help. There was always the potential for fraud, people claiming they could make gold.
Yeah.
And, crucially, perceived links to magic or the occult, which the church was always wary of.
Understandable.
Some early church fathers saw some wisdom in the Hermetic tradition, but others, like Augustine, warned strongly against pagan influences and anything that smacked of idolatry.
A cautious approach. Were there any official rulings?
Yes. The most famous is probably Pope John XXII's papal bull from 1317, Splendens quas non exhibent. Now, this is often misinterpreted as condemning all alchemy.
That it wasn't.
Not really. It specifically targeted fraudulent alchemists, the con artists, claiming they could make gold or silver, basically to cheat people, especially the poor. It was more about condemning deceit and fraud than the study itself,
A moral issue, then.
primarily. But, it definitely added to the general air of suspicion around alchemy. And later, you had figures like the Inquisitor Nicholas Simericus in the late 1300s, explicitly linking alchemy with magic and demons.
Okay, so definitely some strong opposition or concern there. But you mentioned Albertus Magnus, so it wasn't universally condemned by church thinkers.
Exactly. That's key. Despite the warnings, major Catholic scholars did engage with alchemical ideas. Albertus Magnus, a Dominican friar and later a saint, was deeply interested in natural sciences, minerals, metals, all related to alchemy.
Right.
Whether he wrote all the alchemical texts attributed to him is debated, but his known work shows he was thinking about these things.
And his famous student.
St. Thomas Aquinas. He also considered alchemical concepts, thinking about the nature of substances, whether art could truly imitate or surpass nature, God's creation. Theological questions sparked by alchemical claims.
So they were wrestling with it intellectually.
Yes. And then you have Roger Bacon, a Franciscan friar in the 13th century. He was actually a big proponent of alchemy as a potentially valuable experimental science.
He thought it could be useful.
Very much so. He believed it could help humanity cure diseases, maybe even end poverty, if transmutation was possible. He saw it as a tool for good.
So it's really a mixed picture, condemnation of fraud, wariness about magic, but also serious intellectual engagement and even advocacy from some major Catholic figures.
That sums it up well. A nuanced history.
Okay, let's bring it back specifically to Paracelsus. How do his own alchemical and medical ideas fit in with or clash with Catholic thought during his time?
Well, as we said, his core ideas involved shifting from the four humors to his prima sulfur mercury salt as the basis of matter and disease.
Right.
His emphasis on the microcosm and macrocosm link was central, and he even used astrology in his medical work for timing treatments and understanding influences.
Okay.
But crucially for him, this was all deeply religious. He believed the healing virtues in plants and minerals were put there by God. It was a divine design.
So finding and using them was like a religious duty.
Yes, exactly. He saw it as uncovering God's hidden messages in nature. And he strongly believes a physician needed personal faith in God to be an effective healer. Medicine wasn't just a job. It was a divine mission requiring good character, devotion.
That's a very integrated view of faith and science. And what passed for science then?
Absolutely. For him, they were inseparable. But this didn't always sit well with Catholic authorities or scholars.
Why not? He sounded devout.
He certainly identified as Christian and spoke of God constantly, but some of his views were seen as problematic. His emphasis on God being in nature, this sort of immanent view, sometimes bordered on what critics called pantheism.
Seeing God as everything rather than the creator distinct from creation.
Kind of. It differed from the more standard Catholic emphasis on God's transcendence. This, plus his very personal, sometimes unconventional interpretations of Scripture, raised eyebrows and concerns about orthodoxy.
Did this lead to official trouble?
There's strong suspicion, maybe evidence, that some of his works ended up on the Index Expurgatorius, the Church's list of forbidden books.
Ah, okay. That's significant.
Yes. And even decades after his death, you see figures like Johannes Faber writing a report acknowledging Paracelsus's faith but still criticizing his bold interpretations. And contemporary critics, like the Catholic scholar Thomas Erastus, flat out accused him of heresy.
Heresy? Why?
Erastus felt Paracelsus blurred the lines too much between natural and supernatural causes for illness, potentially downplaying God's direct role or intervention.
So It's that tension again, innovation, pushing against established theological boundaries.
Precisely.
Were there any areas where his ideas might have aligned or found common ground with Catholic thought despite the controversies? Any collaboration?
Direct collaboration, like working together on a project, isn't really recorded, but there was that shared intellectual space we talked about.
Right.
Other Catholic thinkers, Albertus Magnus, Roger Bacon, were also exploring nature, using observation, engaging with alchemy, all within a framework of trying to understand God's creation.
So a similar goal, perhaps?
Possibly a similar underlying goal.
Hmm.
Paracelsus's idea of uncovering God's message is hidden in nature.
Yeah.
You could see that aligning with a broader Catholic tradition of studying the book of nature to learn about the Creator.
Finding God in his works.
Exactly.
Mm.
But the specific methods and interpretations caused friction.
And the conflicts were quite direct sometimes.
Yes. Pope John XXII's bull, even though it predated Paracelsus, set a tone of condemning fraud and alchemy. And then you have the direct accusations of heresy from scholars like Erastus and the real possibility of his books being banned by the Church. Those are clear conflicts arising from his ideas and maybe his challenging style, too.
It paints a picture of someone truly wrestling with new knowledge within an existing powerful faith tradition. Let's focus a bit more on his own religious identity. He called himself Christian.
Unquestionably. He invoked God constantly, saw his entire work, medicine, alchemy, natural philosophy, as understanding divine creation. For him, science and religion weren't just compatible. They were fundamentally linked. Discoveries were messages from God.
Okay.
That Hermetic worldview, the microcosm-macrocosm, was spiritual and physical. The universe had this life-giving spirit, which he pretty much equated with God.
But that's where the pantheism concern came in.
Exactly. His emphasis on God within the world seemed, to some, different from the standard Catholic view of God being both immanent and transcendent, distinct from creation. This led to suspicion, maybe even accusations. He leaned towards Protestant ideas, though he identified as Catholic.
Interesting. And his view on the physician's role.
He put huge emphasis on the doctor's personal faith and moral character. Healing wasn't just technique. It was a sacred duty, almost a priestly function, requiring devotion.
A very unique integration of his faith and his understanding of the natural world. So fast forward to today. How is all this viewed now? What's the modern Catholic perspective on historical alchemy or Paracelsus?
Well, the practical side of alchemy making gold, the physical elixir that's obviously been overtaken by modern chemistry and medicine. The Church today doesn't have a specific, detailed stance on historical alchemy itself.
Just a general caution.
Right. General caution against fraud or any occult practices that conflict with Christian teaching on, God, creation, how we should seek health and well-being.
But what about the spiritual alchemy idea?
That's interesting. The idea of alchemy as a metaphor for interchange, purification, transformation, growing closer to God, that symbolism does still resonate in some Catholic, spiritual, and mystical traditions. It's seen as a powerful image for the spiritual journey.
And Paracelsus himself, how is he remembered?
In science, he's mainly remembered for toxicology, for pioneering chemical medicine, a key figure in the history of medicine. His more esoteric, alchemical, and religious views are mostly studied historically now to understand him and his time.
And it's worth remembering those other Catholic figures involved in alchemy too, right? It wasn't just outsiders.
Absolutely. Albertus Magnus, Aquinas engaging with the ideas, Roger Bacon advocating for it, even Pope John XXVII dealing with its fraudulent side, and later figures like Antonio Neri, the 17th century Catholic priest who was an expert glassmaker using alchemical knowledge. It shows alchemy touched many parts of life, including within the Church.
So wrapping up this deep dive, it really is a complex story, isn't it? Paracelsus, alchemy, the Catholic Church.
It is a mix of, genuine intellectual curiosity, deep spiritual seeking, and yes, definite points of conflict and tension. The Church's view wasn't static. It evolved, with suspicion running alongside serious engagement by some really brilliant minds.
And Paracelsus himself, clearly a man of faith, Catholic faith as he saw it, but whose groundbreaking ideas in medicine were completely intertwined with alchemy and his personal, sometimes controversial religious beliefs.
Right, and those controversial views, plus his challenging personality, inevitably led to friction with the establishment.
So today we see him mainly as a medical pioneer. Alchemy's practical goals are history, replaced by science, but its symbolism perhaps still echoes for some Catholics thinking about inner growth.
That seems a fair summary. And it leaves us with a really interesting thought, perhaps, especially for our listeners.
What's that?
Well, when you look at Paracelsus, his deep faith, but also his radical challenges to tradition, It makes you think, doesn't it? How do people within any strong faith tradition balance the drive for new knowledge, for innovation, with respect for established beliefs and authority? What can his story, his struggles and triumphs, teach us about that ongoing dynamic today?
Balancing discovery and tradition. That's definitely something to ponder. A great place to leave it.